I sat outside my own sister's wedding for hours while my family pretended I didn't exist, until the venue manager suddenly walked up to my husband, called him by name, and everything stopped. Because the man they mocked all day wasn't just my husband, he owned the company behind the groom's career. He owned the venue they were celebrating in, and I was the one who secretly paid $15,000 to save their wedding. And in that moment, they finally realized the person they left behind was the only one holding everything together. Chapter 1: The Family That Measured Me. I grew up in a house where love sounded a lot like evaluation. Not loud, not cruel in the obvious ways people recognize, but quiet, constant, and measured. Everything about you was weighed, compared, and filed away like numbers on a report. And somehow, no matter what I did, I always came up just short. We lived in Bellevue, just outside Seattle, in a neighborhood where lawns were always trimmed and people waved at each other with practiced ease. My mother, Diane Mercer, knew every neighbor by name and every detail about their lives that could be useful in conversation. She had been the president of our HOA for years, even after most people forgot why she cared so much about it. To her, appearances were not just important, they were everything. My older sister, Vanessa, fit perfectly into that world. She was confident in the way people admire without questioning. She knew how to talk to clients, how to dress for the room, how to make people feel like they were in the presence of someone who mattered. By the time she was in her late 20s, she was already selling high-end homes across King County, smiling in photos next to properties that looked like they belonged in magazines. And then there was me. I was the one who stayed quiet at dinner, who listened more than I spoke, who noticed the small shifts in tone when my name came up in conversation. Not ignored exactly, but never the center of anything. I learned early that if I did well, it would be acknowledged with a nod. If Vanessa did well, it would become a story retold to guests, neighbors, anyone who would listen. I remember one night in 2018, we were all sitting around the dining table, the same oak table we had used for years. Vanessa had just closed on a property in Medina. I didn't know much about real estate at the time, but I knew from the way my mother talked about it that it was a big deal. My mother leaned forward, her eyes bright in a way I rarely saw when she looked at me. That house was listed at over $2 million, she said, her voice carrying across the table like an announcement. And Vanessa handled the entire negotiation herself. Vanessa smiled, a small, practiced smile, like she was used to being admired. It wasn't that complicated, she said. The buyers were motivated. My father, Harold, nodded, already impressed. Still, that's not something just anyone can do. It takes instinct. I had spent that entire week preparing a presentation at work. It was one of the first times I had been trusted to lead something significant. I waited for a pause, just a moment where I could mention it, not to compete, just to be included. I finally spoke, keeping my voice even. I actually got assigned to lead a project this week. It's about... My mother didn't look at me. She was still looking at Vanessa. "You've always had that natural sense for people," she continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "That's what sets you apart." I stopped talking. No one noticed. I remember sitting there, my hands folded in my lap, listening to them talk about commission percentages and closing timelines, and realizing that my life existed somewhere just outside their field of vision. It wasn't one moment, it was a pattern. Back in 2013, when I graduated from college, I had chosen environmental policy. It wasn't a glamorous path, and I knew that even then, but it was something I believed in. I cared about it in a way that felt real, not performative. When I told my mother, she had smiled in a polite, distant way. "That's nice," she said, "but is there really a future in that?" I tried to explain what the field looked like, how it was growing, how companies were starting to invest in sustainability. She nodded, but it wasn't agreement. It was dismissal. "I just don't see how that's going to impress anyone." It was the word impress that stayed with me. Not impact, not meaning. Impress. My father didn't argue. He never did. He just adjusted his glasses and said something about how Vanessa had already lined up an internship with a real estate firm. That was how things worked in our house, not through open conflict, but through quiet alignment. By the time I met Caleb in 2020, I had already learned to keep most of my life separate from my family. It wasn't a decision I made all at once, it was something that happened gradually. Each time I realized that sharing something important to me would either be minimized or compared. Caleb was different from anyone they would have expected me to be with. He didn't talk about his work unless you asked directly, and even then, his answers were simple. "I work in agriculture," he had said the first time he met my parents. My mother had smiled, but I could see the calculation behind it. "Oh, like a farm?" she asked. "Something like that," he said. That was enough for her to decide who he was. After that, every conversation about Caleb carried a subtle undertone. "It must be nice," she said once when we visited for dinner, "being outdoors all the time. Very simple." Simple, the word landed the same way impress had years earlier. When Caleb and I got married in 2021, it was a small ceremony. We kept it that way intentionally. We didn't want the kind of event that turned into a performance. But even in that simplicity, my family found ways to express their disappointment. My mother had taken me aside the morning of the wedding. "Are you sure about this, Alina?" she asked quietly. "You're still young. You could wait, meet someone who is more established." I looked at her, trying to understand what she meant. "He is established," I said. She gave me a look that said she disagreed but didn't want to argue openly. "I just want what's best for you," she said. What she meant was that what I had chosen didn't fit her idea of what best looked like. Caleb never reacted to any of it, not visibly at least. He would listen, nod when appropriate, and move on. There was a steadiness to him that I didn't fully understand at the time. It wasn't indifference, it was control. Over the next few years, I built my career quietly. I moved into a director role at a renewable energy firm in Seattle. I managed teams, led projects, sat in rooms where decisions actually mattered. My salary grew, my responsibilities expanded, and for the first time in my life, I felt seen, just not from my family. When I visited home, none of that seemed to exist. My mother would ask how work was going, but the question always felt like a formality. "It's good," I would say. "Good is nice," she would reply, already shifting the conversation to Vanessa's latest listing. I stopped trying to explain what I did, not because I was hiding it, but because it didn't seem to make a difference. There were moments, though, when I did step in. In 2022, my parents mentioned they were struggling with some unexpected expenses. Nothing dramatic, just enough to cause stress. I transferred money through a consulting arrangement, structured in a way that wouldn't make it obvious it was coming from me. They never connected it back to me. In 2023, Vanessa needed help with a contact for a potential client who was interested in sustainable building certifications. I made an introduction through someone I worked with. She closed the deal a month later. My mother praised her for being resourceful. I didn't correct them. It wasn't about being acknowledged anymore. It was about understanding that acknowledgement was never going to come from them. By early 2025, when Vanessa announced her engagement to Tristan Cole, the entire tone of the family shifted. "This is different," my mother said one evening over the phone. "He's very well positioned. This could really elevate things." Elevate. There it was again. I listened as she described the venue, the guest list, the connections Tristan had. It wasn't just a wedding, it was an opportunity for them. I agreed to attend, of course, not because I expected anything to change, but because part of me still held on to the idea that showing up mattered. And somewhere between the seating arrangements and the conversations I wasn't included in, I started to see it more clearly than I had ever seen before. It wasn't that I had failed to meet their expectations, it was that their expectations had never included me in the first place. That was the only way I could explain the way I kept saying yes to things I already knew would leave me standing on the outside. It was easier to go along with it, to tell myself I was just showing up, just doing the bare minimum, just being present without expecting anything in return. Vanessa's wedding planning started early in 2025, and from the very beginning, it felt less like a family event and more like a curated experience that I had been accidentally invited to observe. Silver Creek Estate sat just outside Woodinville, surrounded by rolling vineyards and rows of bare winter vines that would turn green by spring. The place was designed for photographs, every angle framed, every detail controlled. It was exactly the kind of venue my mother would have chosen if she had been given the chance. Vanessa told me about it over the phone, her voice light, almost rehearsed. "It's perfect," she said, "the kind of place people remember." I could picture her smiling as she said it, already imagining the way the photos would look online. When the official invitation arrived, it came in a thick envelope with embossed lettering. I noticed right away that it had been postmarked days after several of my cousins had already mentioned receiving theirs. It wasn't something anyone would point out directly, but it was just noticeable enough to feel intentional. I ran my fingers over the paper, reading through the details, the schedule, the dress code. Everything was precise. Everything was planned. I placed it on the counter and stared at it longer than I needed to. At work, things were moving in the opposite direction. A few days after the invitation arrived, Jared stopped by my office, leaning against the doorframe with the kind of casual confidence that came from knowing you had good news to share. "We're putting together the speaker lineup for the Northwest Sustainability Summit," he said. "Your name came up, more than once." I looked up from my laptop, surprised. "Mine?" He nodded. "You've been leading some of the most successful initiatives we've had this year. It makes sense." I hesitated, not because I didn't want it, but because I wasn't used to being the obvious choice for anything. "When is it?" "Late summer," he said, "but we need to confirm soon." I nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it." He smiled, like that was the answer he expected. "Good. It's about time people outside this building hear what you've been doing." After he left, I sat there for a moment, letting it settle. At work, I didn't have to prove that I belonged. I just did. That contrast stayed with me the entire drive home. Vanessa's messages started coming in more frequently as the weeks passed. Group chats, emails, occasional calls, not to include me in decisions, but to assign small tasks that needed to be handled. "Can you pick up the welcome bags on Friday? Can you check in with the coordinator about the guest list changes? Can you make sure the signage is correct when you get there?" They weren't unreasonable requests. On their own, they were simple, practical things, but taken together, they drew a line that I couldn't ignore. I wasn't part of the wedding. I was part of the logistics. The rehearsal dinner was the first time I saw how clearly that line had been drawn. It was held at a restaurant overlooking the water, the kind of place where the lighting was soft and the menu didn't list prices. When Caleb and I walked in, most of the guests were already seated. Vanessa spotted us, her smile flickering for a second before settling into something more neutral. "You made it," she said, like it had been a question. "Of course," I replied. She glanced at Caleb briefly, then back at me. "We're almost done with seating," she said. "You can just grab those menus and bring them to the table in the back." I followed her gaze. The table she pointed to was smaller, tucked near the edge of the room, slightly removed from the main group. For a second, I thought she might realize how it looked, that she might correct herself, laugh it off, say something that acknowledged the imbalance. She didn't. I picked up the menus. Caleb didn't say anything. He just walked with me, carrying a few of them without being asked. When we sat down, I could see the main table clearly. My parents were there, along with Tristan and a few of his colleagues. Laughter moved easily between them, conversations overlapping, energy flowing in a way that never quite reached our side of the room. At one point, I caught a fragment of conversation from across the space. Tristan was talking about an upcoming review at work. "It's looking good. Senior leadership is paying attention." My mother leaned in slightly. "You deserve it. You've worked so hard for this." I watched as Vanessa rested her hand lightly on his arm, her expression proud. No one looked over at our table. The next morning, I received a message from my mother. Make sure you wear something appropriate tomorrow. Nothing too bold. This is an important event." I stared at the message for a moment before typing back. "I understand." I knew what she meant. Appropriate didn't refer to style or fit. It meant not drawing attention, not disrupting the image she was trying to maintain. When we arrived at Silver Creek Estate for the final walkthrough, the space looked even more polished than I remembered. Rows of chairs lined the lawn, perfectly spaced. The reception area was set up with long tables, centerpieces already arranged. Olivia, the wedding coordinator, was moving quickly between different areas, checking details, speaking to vendors, adjusting timelines. Vanessa waved me over. "Can you double-check the seating chart?" she said. "I think something got shifted." I walked over to the display, scanning the names, the table assignments. My name was there, near the bottom, assigned to a table I hadn't seen yet. It wasn't near my parents, it wasn't near Vanessa, it was near the edge of the reception layout, closer to the service entrance than the dance floor. I stood there for a moment, taking it in. "Is everything right?" Vanessa asked from behind me. I turned slightly. "It looks fine," I said. She nodded, already moving on. "Good. I don't want any confusion tomorrow." Later, I found Olivia near the entrance flipping through a binder filled with schedules and confirmations. "Everything going smoothly?" I asked. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "For the most part, we had a small issue with the venue payment a while back, but it's been taken care of." I paused. "What kind of issue?" "Just a timing thing," she said quickly. "Nothing major. It all cleared before it became a problem." I nodded, not pressing further. But the way she said it stayed with me, the slight hesitation, the quick recovery. It reminded me of something I had already known, that behind the polished surface, there were cracks, small ones, easy to miss if you weren't looking for them. That night, as Caleb and I drove home, the silence between us felt different. Not uncomfortable, just aware. "You don't have to keep doing this," he said finally. I looked out the window, watching the streetlights pass by in steady intervals. "I know," I said. He didn't push. He never did. I thought about everything that had happened over the past few weeks, the invitations, the seating, the small tasks that kept me busy but never included. It wasn't overt, it wasn't loud, but it was clear. They didn't need me there, not really. They needed everything to run smoothly. They needed the image to hold together. And for a while, I had let that be enough. But standing there, looking at my name on that seating chart, placed just far enough away to matter, I started to understand something I hadn't fully accepted before. This wasn't about being overlooked. It was about being positioned. And the position they had chosen for me was one I couldn't pretend not to see anymore. Chapter 3. The moment they decided I didn't belong. By the time the wedding day arrived, I had already decided I would get through it quietly, stay polite, and leave as soon as I reasonably could. The morning was cold in that early spring way Washington does so well, pale light and damp air making everything look softer than it really was. Silver Creek Estate was exactly what my mother would have wanted. Clean lines, perfect symmetry, vineyards stretching out behind the ceremony space like a backdrop designed for photographs. Caleb drove with one hand on the wheel, calm as always. "You don't have to stay long," he said. "I know. If we want to leave, we leave." I looked out the window as we turned into the long gravel drive. "I just want to get through it." He nodded once. "Then we get through it." When we stepped out, I noticed immediately how everyone else had arrived. Expensive cars, polished shoes, quiet confidence. Guests stood in small groups, already settled into the atmosphere. No one came over. No greeting from my mother, no acknowledgement from Vanessa, no familiar face stepping forward to say they were glad I was there. Even the people who recognized me seemed to hesitate, like speaking to me might place them on the wrong side of something. Near the entrance, a young staff member stood by the escort cards. She looked up when we approached, glanced at me, then at Caleb, then back down again. She reached for a card near the front, paused, and then another staff member leaned in and said something under her breath. The first girl froze, then quietly swapped the card. I saw it happen. I stepped closer. Is there a problem? She smiled quickly. No, ma'am, just a final seating adjustment. She handed me the card. Table 12. I didn't need to ask where that was. Caleb had noticed too. His expression didn't change much, but I could feel his attention sharpen. Inside, the ceremony space was nearly full. My parents stood near the front, greeting guests. When my mother finally noticed us, her smile shifted just slightly. There you are, she said, scanning me quickly. Try not to disappear before family photos. We're here, I replied. Her eyes flicked to Caleb. Good. Just keep things easy today, Alina. This is an important event. I knew what she meant. Don't stand out, don't disrupt anything. Before I could respond, she turned to someone else. Linda, you made it. You look wonderful. Just like that, I was dismissed. The ceremony passed smoothly. Vanessa looked exactly how she wanted to look. Flawless, composed, fully in control. Tristan stood beside her, confident, like the entire room confirmed something about his place in the world. From where I sat, I could see everything clearly. I just wasn't part of it. Afterwards, guests moved toward the reception. Music drifted through the space, servers carrying trays of champagne and small plates. We approached the main entrance when a staff member stepped in front of us. Sorry, the main floor is being held for the bridal party right now. If you could wait over here for a few minutes. He gestured toward a lounge area near the service hallway. I looked past him. Guests were already inside, finding their tables. We have a table assignment. Of course, he replied, polite but firm. This is just temporary. Caleb looked at him steadily. Who asked for that? The man hesitated. I'm just following direction. We stepped aside. The lounge area was quiet, almost too quiet. Through the open doorway, I could see catering staff moving quickly, checking lists, adjusting details. I held a champagne glass someone had handed me, not drinking it. This is deliberate, I said. I know, he replied. He added after a moment, they're managing the image. That made sense. I wasn't being removed completely, just placed carefully where I wouldn't interfere. A woman I recognized from one of Vanessa's events passed by, slowed when she saw us, and gave a polite smile. Hi, Alina. I thought your table was inside. So did I. She shifted awkwardly. I'm sure it's just a mix-up. It wasn't. After she left, a server walked past, glanced at Caleb longer than necessary, then kept moving. Another staff member did the same a few minutes later. It wasn't recognition exactly, more like uncertainty, like they were trying to place him. Caleb didn't react. Eventually, the reception doors opened fully. Guests began taking their seats. Laughter carried through the room. My mother walked past us once, saw where we were, and didn't look surprised. She looked relieved. That was the part that settled everything for me. When she came back, her voice was low. Alina, please don't make this awkward. I'm standing where your staff told me to stand. She exhaled sharply. Then just stay here until they sort it out. There are people here who matter to Vanessa and Tristan. People who matter. I felt something inside me go very still. Caleb spoke before I could. And Alina doesn't matter? My mother's expression tightened. This is not the time. No, he said calmly. I think it is. She straightened. I am asking for one day without complications. I set my glass down before I dropped it. You asked me not to draw attention. You moved our seats. Your staff stopped us at the entrance. What exactly would count as a complication now? She didn't answer. Vanessa appeared in the doorway then, bouquet still in hand, Tristan beside her. She had seen enough to know she needed to step in. What's going on? Alina's being sensitive, my mother said. Vanessa looked at me. Seriously? I stayed quiet. She glanced around, taking in the situation, then back at me. It's one table assignment. Why does everything have to be personal? Because it is. She let out a short breath. No, it's practical. This is a formal event. People are placed where they fit. Caleb shifted beside me. Where they fit? Vanessa's eyes hardened slightly. You really shouldn't be here, she said, her voice calm but firm. This isn't your world.
The words didn't come out as an insult, they came out as something she believed. For a moment, everything else faded. The music, the voices, the movement around us. Just that sentence, clear and final. This isn't your world. I looked at her, at the room, at the version of reality she had built so carefully around herself, and understood something I had been avoiding for years. I didn't belong here, not because I wasn't enough, because they had decided I wasn't. I nodded once. Okay. She blinked, slightly thrown by the lack of resistance. I turned to Caleb. Let's go. He didn't hesitate. My mother stepped forward. Alina, don't do this. I met her eyes. I'm not doing anything. I turned away from the reception, from the music, from the room that never had been meant for me, and started walking toward the exit.
Chapter 4: The Reveal That Changed Everything. I had only taken a few steps when I heard a voice behind us, calm but clear enough to cut through the noise. Mr. Rowan. I stopped before I meant to. Caleb did too. When I turned, Elliot Price was walking toward us with quiet urgency. I recognized him from earlier visits, the general manager of Silver Creek Estate. He carried himself like someone who knew exactly what he was responsible for and intended to fix whatever had gone wrong. But this was different. He wasn't looking at the situation, he was looking at Caleb. Mr. Rowan, I'm very sorry. I didn't realize you had arrived. The shift in the room was immediate. Not dramatic, not loud, but noticeable. Conversation slowed. A few heads turned. My mother stopped mid-step behind us. Vanessa's expression tightened, confused. Caleb shook his hand once. We were on our way out, he said. Elliot glanced toward the reception, then back at us. That won't be necessary. There's been a mistake. Vanessa let out a short laugh. No, there hasn't. There was just some confusion with seating. Elliot turned toward her, polite but firm. Then I'll correct it immediately. For the first time, Vanessa hesitated. I don't think that's necessary. It is, he replied. The conversation around us quieted just enough that people could hear without pretending they weren't listening. Caleb spoke again, calm as ever. There's nothing to correct. My wife was told she didn't belong here. Elliot's expression sharpened. She was told what? No one answered. He turned toward the staff member who had redirected us earlier. Who instructed you to move them? The girl hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Vanessa. I was told there had been a seating change. By whom? She didn't say it, but she didn't have to. Elliot inhaled slowly, then looked back at Caleb. I apologize. That should not have happened. Tristan stepped forward then, trying to regain control. I'm sure we can handle this privately. Caleb finally looked at him. It's already been handled privately, for quite a while. Tristan frowned slightly, then said the name like he was testing it. Rowan. Caleb didn't respond. Tristan looked closer, and I watched the recognition happen in stages. Rowan Agricultural, he said. Caleb inclined his head once. Tristan's posture shifted. That's one of our main suppliers. He glanced at me, then back at Caleb, confusion giving way to something closer to concern. I didn't realize. Most people don't, Caleb said. My mother stepped in quickly, her voice tight. If there's been a misunderstanding, we can all just calm down. Caleb turned toward her. Your daughter told my wife she didn't belong here. Diane's expression softened into denial. I'm sure Vanessa didn't mean it like that. Vanessa spoke finally, her voice controlled but edged. This is being blown out of proportion. Elliot cut in before it could escalate further. Mrs. Mercer, I think we need to address the situation clearly. He turned back to Caleb. This property operates under Cascade Heritage Hospitality. It falls under Rowan Leisure Holdings, which acquired controlling interest in 2022. The words landed heavily. Vanessa blinked. What does that mean? Elliot didn't hesitate. It means Mr. Rowan is part owner of this venue. Silence spread outward in uneven waves. Conversations stopped, then resumed in hushed tones. Guests leaned closer, listening. My father spoke for the first time.
You own this place? In part, through the holding company. Vanessa laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's not possible. Why would you let us think you were just... She stopped herself. Caleb didn't. I am a farmer. It wasn't defensive, it was factual. Tristan stepped closer, his voice lower now. Your company supplies ours, he said. Half our contracts run through your network. Caleb said nothing. Tristan swallowed. My promotion review is coming up. I'm aware, Caleb replied. The color drained from Tristan's face. How would you know that? Because your board package crossed my desk last week. That was the moment everything shifted. Not just confusion now, fear. My mother looked between them, trying to understand the scale of what she was hearing. Vanessa's composure started to crack. This is being ridiculous. You can't interfere with his career because of a misunderstanding. Caleb cut in before it could escalate further. Mrs. Mercer, I think we need to address the situation clearly. He turned back to Caleb. This property operates under Cascade Heritage Hospitality. It falls under Rowan Leisure Holdings, which acquired controlling interest in 2022. The words landed heavily. Vanessa blinked. What does that mean? Elliot didn't hesitate. It means Mr. Rowan is part owner of this venue. Silence spread outward in uneven waves. Conversations stopped, then resumed in hushed tones. Guests leaned closer, listening. My father spoke for the first time. You own this place? In part, through the holding company. Vanessa laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's not possible. Why would you let us think you were just... She stopped herself. Caleb didn't. I am a farmer. It wasn't defensive, it was factual. Tristan stepped closer, his voice lower now. Your company supplies ours, he said. Half our contracts run through your network. Caleb said nothing. Tristan swallowed. My promotion review is coming up. I'm aware, Caleb replied. The color drained from Tristan's face. How would you know that? Because your board package crossed my desk last week. That was the moment everything shifted. Not just confusion now, fear. My mother looked between them, trying to understand the scale of what she was hearing. Vanessa's composure started to crack. This is being ridiculous. You can't interfere with his career because of a misunderstanding. Caleb cut in before it could escalate further. Mrs. Mercer, I think we need to address the situation clearly. He turned back to Caleb. This property operates under Cascade Heritage Hospitality. It falls under Rowan Leisure Holdings, which acquired controlling interest in 2022. The words landed heavily. Vanessa blinked. What does that mean? Elliot didn't hesitate. It means Mr. Rowan is part owner of this venue. Silence spread outward in uneven waves. Conversations stopped, then resumed in hushed tones. Guests leaned closer, listening. My father spoke for the first time. You own this place? In part, through the holding company. Vanessa laughed, but there was no humor in it. That's not possible. Why would you let us think you were just... She stopped herself. Caleb didn't. I am a farmer. It wasn't defensive, it was factual. Tristan stepped closer, his voice lower now. Your company supplies ours, he said. Half our contracts run through your network. Caleb said nothing. Tristan swallowed. My promotion review is coming up. I'm aware, Caleb replied. The color drained from Tristan's face. How would you know that? Because your board package crossed my desk last week. That was the moment everything shifted. Not just confusion now, fear. My mother looked between them, trying to understand the scale of what she was hearing. Vanessa's composure started to crack. This is being ridiculous. You can't interfere with his career because of a misunderstanding. Caleb cut in before it could escalate further. Mrs. Mercer, I think we need to address the situation clearly. He turned back to Caleb. This property operates under Cascade Heritage Hospitality. It falls under Rowan Leisure Holdings, which acquired controlling interest in 2022. The words landed heavily. Vanessa blinked. What does that mean? Elliot didn't hesitate. It means Mr. Rowan is part owner of this venue. Silence spread outward in uneven waves. Conversations stopped, then resumed in hushed tones. Guests leaned closer, listening. My father spoke for the first time. "You own this place?" "In part, through the holding company." Vanessa laughed, but there was no humor in it. "That's not possible. Why would you let us think you were just—" She stopped herself. "Caleb didn't. I am a farmer." It wasn't defensive, it was factual. Tristan stepped closer, his voice lower now. "Your company supplies ours," he said. "Half our contracts run through your network." Caleb said nothing. Tristan swallowed. "My promotion review is coming up." "I'm aware," Caleb replied. The color drained from Tristan's face. "How would you know that?" "Because your board package crossed my desk last week." That was the moment everything shifted. Not just confusion now, fear. My mother looked between them, trying to understand the scale of what she was hearing. Vanessa's composure started to crack. "This is being ridiculous. You can't interfere with his career because of a misunderstanding." Caleb cut in before it could escalate further. "Mrs. Mercer, I think we need to address the situation clearly." He turned back to Caleb. "This property operates under Cascade Heritage Hospitality. It falls under Rowing Leisure Holdings, which acquired controlling interest in 2022. The words landed heavily. Vanessa blinked. "What does that mean?" Elliot didn't hesitate. "It means Mr. Rowan is part owner of this venue." Silence spread outward in uneven waves. Conversations stopped, then resumed in hushed tones. Guests leaned closer, listening. My father spoke for the first time. "You own this place?" "In part, through the holding company."
Chapter 5. What remains after everything falls apart. The drive back felt quieter than any silence we had shared before. Not heavy, not tense, just clear. Caleb kept his eyes on the road, steady as always. I rested my head back against the seat and watched the trees blur past the window, the last of the daylight fading into that soft gray that settles over western Washington in the evening. Neither of us spoke for a while. It wasn't avoidance, it was understanding. "You okay?" he asked finally. I thought about it for a second. "Yeah," I said. "I think I am." And I meant it. Not because what happened wasn't big or because it didn't change things. It did. It changed everything. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't trying to figure out how to make it fit into something that made sense for them. It made sense for me. We got home just as the sky turned fully dark. Caleb unlocked the door, flipped on the light, and everything inside looked exactly the same as it had that morning. Simple, quiet, untouched by whatever had just happened miles away. I slipped off my shoes and set them by the door. "I'm going to change," I said. He nodded. "I'll make some tea." It was such a normal exchange that it almost felt surreal. In the bedroom, I stood in front of the mirror for a moment before taking off my earrings. The dress I had chosen carefully that morning now felt like something from a different version of the day. I folded it neatly and placed it on the chair instead of dropping it on the floor. That felt important for some reason. When I walked back into the kitchen, Caleb had already set 2 mugs on the counter. Steam curled up in soft lines, filling the space with the familiar scent of chamomile. We sat across from each other without saying much. "You didn't have to say anything," he said after a while. "I know, but you did." I shrugged slightly. I think I was just tired of pretending it didn't matter. He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "That makes sense." We didn't go back over the details. We didn't replay the scene or analyze every word. We didn't need to. What had happened was already settled in a way that didn't require discussion. The next morning, my phone started ringing before I was even fully awake. Diane. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again 10 minutes later. And again. By the 3rd call, I muted the phone and set it face down on the nightstand. When I finally checked it later, there were 3 voicemails and a string of messages. "We need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. You left before we could fix things." I listened to the first voicemail while making coffee. Her voice was softer than I had heard it in years. "Alina, please call me back. We didn't realize how this looked. Vanessa was under a lot of stress. Things got out of hand." I deleted it. Not out of anger, just clarity.
A few hours later, an email came through from my father. Subject line, "I'm sorry." The message was long, longer than anything he had ever written to me before. He talked about how things had escalated, how he should have stepped in sooner, how he didn't want this to create distance between us. I read it once, then closed it. I didn't reply. Over the next few days, bits and pieces of what happened started to surface, not directly, but through the kind of quiet channels people use when they don't want to admit they are asking questions. A coworker forwarded me a message from someone who had been at the wedding. "Heard things got intense. Are you okay?" I responded with a simple yes. Jared stopped by my office later that week. "So," he said, leaning against the doorframe the same way he always did. "So, I heard you might have had an eventful weekend." I raised an eyebrow. "That depends on your definition of eventful." He smiled. "Let's just say word travels." I considered asking how much he had heard, but decided it didn't matter. "I'm fine," I said. "Good," he replied, "because we still need you ready for that keynote." I nodded. "I will be." And I meant that too. A week later, Caleb mentioned that Monica Alvarez opened a formal review at AgriSupply. He didn't go into detail, and I didn't ask. But a few days after that, I heard from someone indirectly connected to the company that Tristan's promotion had been suspended pending the outcome of the investigation. 2 weeks later, it was more than that. Expense reports flagged, client entertainment charges that didn't align with policy, travel reimbursements that raised questions. Nothing criminal, nothing dramatic enough to make headlines, but enough to matter in a corporate setting where perception and trust were everything. The promotion didn't just stall, it disappeared. And not long after that, so did his position. It was quiet, no public announcement, no scandal, just a gradual removal that anyone paying attention could see. Vanessa's situation unfolded differently. She didn't lose everything at once. It wasn't that kind of collapse, but she lost something more subtle. One of her major listings fell through. A client she had been working with for months suddenly decided to go in a different direction. Another postponed indefinitely. At first, she blamed the market, then timing, then anything that didn't require her to look at what had changed. But the truth was simpler. People had seen something. Maybe not the full story, maybe not every detail, but enough to make them pause. And in her line of work, hesitation was everything. My mother called less frequently as the weeks went on. The messages became shorter, less urgent, more uncertain. "We should talk when you're ready. I hope you're doing well. I miss you." I read them. I just didn't respond. It wasn't about punishing her. It wasn't about making a point. It was about recognizing that nothing she could say right now would change what had already been made clear. Caleb didn't bring it up unless I did. One evening, about a month after the wedding, we were sitting outside on the back porch, the air finally warming as spring settled in. "Do you think you'll ever talk to them again?" he asked. I thought about it, really thought about it. "Maybe," I said, "but not like before." He nodded, accepting that without pushing further. At work, things continued moving forward. The keynote approached, and I spent long evenings refining my presentation, shaping ideas into something that felt honest and useful. When the day came, I stood on stage in front of a room of people who were there to listen, not to evaluate whether I deserved to be there. It felt different, not better in a dramatic way, just right. Afterwards, people came up to talk, to ask questions, to connect. Jared caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small nod. That was enough. Later that night, as I sat in the quiet of our living room, I thought back to the moment Vanessa had said those words. "This isn't your world." She had been right, just not in the way she intended. It wasn't my world, and it didn't need to be. What I had built, what Caleb had built, the life we lived day to day, it didn't depend on being accepted into rooms that required me to shrink to fit inside them. Respect, I realized, had never been something I was going to find there, and maybe it never had been. I didn't hate them, that surprised me. I didn't feel the kind of anger I thought I would, just distance, clean and steady. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to convince someone to see you. So if you were in my place, standing in that room, hearing those words, knowing what you knew, Would you have stayed and tried to fix it, or would you have walked away too?